My hair is nuts. Who cares? What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Pens and Tea. My name is Carrie, and today I am bored. I am bored. I don't have Parker with me right now, which is sad, and I always get sad when she's not here. She's still at my parents' house. She will be coming back tomorrow. But you know what? I need to answer a question. A question that I get asked all the time. And that question, my friends, is going to get answered today. So a little behind the scenes for you all. Fun fact. I am staring at all of my laundry. Because some of it I don't put in the dryer because it tends to shrink. And that's no fun. So let's talk about this. One of the questions I get asked all the time is what nibs to buy. So a lot of times when myself and others will do YouTube reviews of pens, first impressions of pens, just generally talking pens, people have a pretty good idea about whether or not the body itself and or the filling mechanism of said pen is going to be for them. What it always comes down to, of course, rightly so, is the writing experience and how the nib actually feels on the paper. So that's kind of what I'm going to break down a little bit today for you, because one of the most popular fountain pen brands out there is from Pilot, and their nibs are interesting. I'm going to preface this by putting little asterisks on the video here. Pilot as a whole, there are some that I dislike, but as a whole, probably has the most pen models that I like. It's very rare that I find a Pilot pen that I dislike. I'm not a huge fan of the Pilot Kakuno. Again, not necessarily because it writes poorly. It wrote fine. It's just the design-wise, not for me. The little smiley nib, super cute, but overall not super for me. I will say the Pilot that probably has the most different writing experience that I've used so far is the E95S, which I did a review on. I then sold that pen, and then a little while later I regretted selling that pen, and so I rebought it and then did a re-review of it. It's really great. This is a medium nib. I also have the Pilot Custom 912 and the Falcon nib with an ebonite feed, one of my favorite all-time pens ever. And then one that I also really like is the Pilot Custom 74. And the reason why I really like this one is because unlike any other Pilot pen that I have, this one is a little bit squishy. As I've said in many of my reviews about this pen, it is not a flex pen, but it does have that sort of shock absorber feel like your car does while you're writing, which some people love, some people hate. But today I'm going to more specifically be talking about the Pilot Custom 823. And the reason why is because on the smoke version, I have a fine nib, and on the amber version, I have a medium nib. And it's the fairest way to compare nib sizes is to use the exact same pen. And the difference between the fine and the medium is what the vast majority of people would want to know, because those are really the nib sizes that have the biggest difference, and to me have the biggest experience while writing, not just the nib or the line width on the paper. When you actually feel the nib against the paper, that's the biggest difference between these sizes. I've used the extra fine. I've used the posting nib, which is the extra fine. I did not like that one very much. It's just not for me. I've used the Waverly nib. Don't mind that one at all. Again, it's not one that I use like a ton. I've used Pilot's music nibs, definitely their Falcon, their fines, their mediums. I believe I've used a broad from Pilot. Don't quote me on it because I'm not 100% certain, to be fair, on the broad. And I know that I have not used the signature nib. So I've used the posting, the extra fine, medium, the music, the Falcon, and potentially the broad, but I'm not positive on that. So let's take a closer look at these nibs. So the nibs visually pretty much look the same. I can't get that off my hand. They pretty much look the exact same because they are basically the exact same. The difference is the one on the left, the smoke version, is a fine nib, and the one on the right in the amber is a medium. Again, visually, everything else is the same, just the nib width. And the feeds are the same on this pen as well. I have the regular plastic nib that it comes with. I've not changed it like I have with my 912. These are Pilot's number 15 size nibs. Pilot has their own proprietary nib sizes, but I would say this is their equivalent of like a number 6 size nib, size-wise. If you get the Pilot Custom 74, then you get a much smaller nib. But again, visually, same basic scroll work. This is Pilot's number 5 size. And then, since we're doing it, we might as well do it all the way. Let's just throw in Pilot's number 10 size nib, shall we? That is on the custom 912. So now we have the size 15, the size 10, and the size 5. There is bigger ones that I have not had the pleasure of using because my wallet is not fat enough for those pens. But yeah, like I said, this one, the Custom 74, is very, very different of a writing experience. And same with this pen here because of the Falcon nib and the Ebonite feed. So I'm not going to compare those two. And again, 90+% of the conversation is all about the difference between the fine and the medium. Now, if you take a look at the tipping material up here, you can see already the big difference between the tiny little tip and the bigger tip of the fine versus medium. And especially if we compare them by the side profile. On the fine, there's virtually no tipping material. My nails are trash, I know. And on the medium, there's definitely much more tipping material here. On the back, again, visually, much more tipping material on the medium. And definitely probably won't be able to see much from this angle. It's very hard to get the pen or phone to focus on that. But overall, that's the whole point, is the fine has much less tipping material than the medium. And the tipping material, of course, is what is actually going to touch the paper and put down the line. Therefore, less material, finer line, more material, wider line. Basic premise. Now, I will say with Pilot in particular, the difference between that fine and medium, pretty stark. So let me throw some ink in here and we will compare the lines. We're going to be using Pilot Iroshizuku Tsukio, which I've got some schmutz on the label here. This is one of my all-time favorite inks, but certainly my favorite Pilot ink. I really like the color, the performance, all of that goodness, and well, I just love it so much. All right, here we go. Little dot there. So the way that this feels, kind of like a very sharp number 2 pencil. Very crisp lines. You can get a little bit of line variation. Very smooth, but very crisp is pretty much the way that I can describe that. The crispiness factor is nice. The medium nibs do not have quite as much of that crispy feeling, but still very, very, very nice. As you can tell, it looks much, much broader between them. And that is because of that tipping material. Now, I will say, because it has a little bit more of that tipping material, you do get a little bit of a smoother experience while writing. You lose a little bit of that sharp, that crispy number 2, freshly sharpened pencil feeling, and you go into a bit less feedback. Neither of them are scratchy. I want to make that very, very clear. Neither of them are scratchy. They're both smooth. It's just with a finer line, you don't have quite as much absorbing feel with the actual nib on the paper. You don't get as much even an ink onto the paper. As you can tell, the fine is a little bit drier than the medium. And with a little bit less ink, you also increase a little bit more friction, which also helps lend to that feeling. I enjoy them both. They provide a very different writing experience. So for me, I tend to gravitate a little bit more towards the medium than I do the fine, but there's something to be said about the fine, like the way that feels. Because there's just like I said, that crispy feeling, where you can be really precise. You can be much more precise than you can with the medium nib. Again, because you have such a fine line. Now, between the extra fine, I don't happen to have one, but between the extra fine and the regular fine, there's not a ton of difference. Between the posting nib and the fine, there's a huge difference. Like I said, the posting, not for me. The fine nib here is really good, especially if you tend to write on the small side. Whereas if you have the medium nib, and I'll write the same word, and I'll try and write as small as that. If you have the medium nib, you're going to lose a little bit of the intricacies, but you're going to get more of the shading and the actual properties of the ink itself with the medium nib than you would the fine. So it's really all about what you want. Is you're writing very, very small to where it's going to look overcrowded and bunched up and squishy with the medium nib, or do you tend to write a little bit bigger so that you can have a little bit more line variation with something like a ink variation with something like the medium? Because if you have the fine nib and you tend to write a bit bigger, it's fine, but you can also take advantage of some of the shading that the medium would provide. Now, if you're using just straight up black ink, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So it's really kind of what you want your experience to be. My recommendation between the two is, if you can afford it, get both, because they're so different. The experience between them is so incredibly different, and I really think a lot of people's collections would benefit from having both in it. But if you can't, then decide really what suits your writing better. Do you want this Pilot pen to be an everyday writer? So if you do write smaller, then you want to make sure you get fine. Or do you not want this pen to necessarily be an everyday writer? You want a different experience every once in a while, in which case you might want to get the medium. And then obviously vice versa, if your writing is a bit bigger. If you want it to be an everyday writer, get the medium. If you want a different experience every now and then, get the fine. Because really, ultimately, it's up to you. My, like I said, everyday experience, I tend to go more towards the medium nib than the fine, but sometimes I just want that crisp. And I mean, that's also why I've kept, where is it here? That's also why I've kept this platinum pen here with the fine nib, because it writes very, very, very similarly to the Pilot Custom 823, except it is toothier than the Pilot. So if you happen to have used a platinum nib before and you didn't like, you liked the line width, but you didn't like the experience of writing with it, then I would pick up the Pilot fine, because you're going to get basically the same line width, but you're going to get it in a smoother experience. Now, I say this again with an asterisk on it. Every nib is slightly different. So if you happen to get one that unfortunately maybe didn't quite hit quality control, then you may have a different experience than I do. I will say Pilot is very, very good. They are not like some other brands that have very poor quality control, in my personal experience. Visconti. So definitely take a look at that. But yeah, if you've used the platinum before and you liked the fine nib width, but you didn't really like the toothy feel, then definitely don't be afraid to get the Pilot fine. While they're both Japanese pens, the Pilot fine definitely offers you a smoother experience. So between the two, like I said, ultimately, it just comes down to what you want in your experience. But I hope that helps for those of you who have been wanting to know specifically the difference between those two. I would say that it's probably the biggest question I get when it comes to Pilot pens, and pens in general, to be fair. What's different between that fine and medium nib? But also, if you're not interested in the pens at all, do also potentially pick up this ink, because it is absolutely fabulous. Pilot Iroshizuku Tsukiyo, one of my all-time favorite blue blacks that has a ever so slight teal tinge. I adore it very, very much. But thank you very much for watching this video. Like I said, I hope that helps. For those of you who have used the fine versus medium Pilots, let everybody know in the comment section down below if you agree, disagree, and or why, down in the comments. If you've watched it this far in, man, I love your faces, because all YouTube cares about these days is the watch length. So if you've watched it this far in, thank you so much. You are supporting me like crazy, and it means a lot. If you want to help support in a different way, you can also find the link to the Patreon account that I have in the description. But as always, guys, I will see you every Monday and Friday and the occasional Tuesday like last week. So hit that subscribe, hit the thumbs up, and I'll catch you later. Bye.